All right, so what's up, everybody? Welcome back to Blue Collar Bodybuilding Podcast. I got my buddy Mark Arena here, my good friend from the gym. I got my coach Paul Barnett from Anabolic Bodybuilding. And how you guys doing?
Going on, man?
Not much.
Doing well, Dave.
Yeah, I got to be honest. I'm feeling like garbage. I drove myself. I was telling you, Paul, into a hole with training. I literally feel like you ever seen that movie Misery where Kathy Bates beats the shit out of that guy with a baseball bat? That's how my legs feel right now. I don't know why. I'm just so in a hole, needing a deload. So I'm actually kind of excited to not train for once. I just can't muster the energy, the strength.
I've only gotten myself once or maybe twice in my life where I've reached a point of like what I consider true overtraining, which is where I know we were talking about with Dr. Todd yesterday, but where where your CNS just gets completely fried, like your body just says no. There was a time on contest prep where I had pushed myself so hard and I wasn't sleeping. And I remember I went into the gym one day and it was the weirdest thing, man. Like I literally could not leg press one plate on each side. I was like a bikini girl.
Yeah.
It was like it just overnight, it just happened, and my CNS gave me the big old fuck you and said I'm not working anymore. I've had like, where your joints and your connective tissues start rebelling and pushing back on you. I've had that happen before, but that's honestly that's easier to deal with. But like if you get to the point where the weights just aren't moving, the only thing that fixes it is just not working out.
Yeah. I got to like a point last week where my strength's been going up good. I'm happy with my strength going up on different lifts, but I was getting to the point where I couldn't get another rep. I couldn't get the weight, and it literally felt like it was weighing twice as much as it should, the weight. And then also this whole weekend, like Friday, I took off from the gym, and I know I'm not sick, but like my hips and knees and my joints almost feel flu-like they're just so achy. I was just
inflammation.
Yeah. So I've been just taking ibuprofen like candy and
careful with the ibuprofen, man. It's really bad for your kidneys. Like people don't know how bad it is for your kidneys. You could run it for a few days, but it's like there was a God, I remember it was a few years back. I saw this study they did. Like there was a ton of NFL players, like retired NFL players, that were having kidney failure in their 40s, and they couldn't figure out why. And it was from the large doses of NAISDs that they were given, basically ibuprofen. They were giving them those 800 milligram ibuprofens and just feeding those guys like candy, and then they end up in kidney failure.
Yeah, that's scary. Yeah, I've only been doing like 800 milligrams a day. I'll split it up, but that's
not so bad. I mean, these guys were taking like 2,400, 3 times that.
Yeah,
I don't know if you remember Tom Prince, bodybuilder.
No,
he passed away recently of cancer. It was unrelated to this, but I remember him talking about he ended up having to have a kidney transplant, I believe, or no, he was on dialysis. That's what it was. And he said it was from abusing ibuprofen.
Really? Yeah, that's good to know. Yeah, I know some people that take it like daily, constantly. So I know that.
Yeah, lower doses. I mean, once again, toxicology, when it comes to toxicology, the devil's in the dose. So dose and frequency and duration all add up to toxicity. So it's like you're very familiar with drinking. Having a glass of wine a day is probably not that detrimental, but drinking a whole bottle of tequila is going to catch up with you after a while. Yeah
Exactly. What about you, Mark? What do you do for like deloads, or you just kind of play them by ear? Or
I play. I'm not in the big leagues like you characters, so I do a lot of things, still fairly intuitively, aside from the way I train. So pain. I live with pain. I'm a retired military, and I live with the result of a torn pec from a rappel injury and an old torn hamstring. I found after I retired this past year, I now have spondylitis, arthritis, and which made a lot of sense. And I found out now that I have fusion in part of my spine.
Really?
And and part of my hips. It was an incidental finding, and
here I am. Fused
What's
together?
that?
Like it accidentally fused together over time?
Whether it's accidentally or not, it just happened. So with some inflammatory arthritis like spondylitis and some rheumatoid arthritises, you can get fusion of joints. So my sacroiliac joint is actually fused now.
Really?
Yeah, and it's interesting because during the workup, they found out I had like a lot of inflammation in my left hip,
Mhm.
which was probably about the size of probably close to a racquetball, the bursitis that I had in there. And
Wow.
I have, some osteoarthritis as well. But, I'm going to be 55 in a couple of weeks.
Mhm.
So a lot of this I sort of just expected. And,
Yeah.
I don't take anything for pain right now. In order for me to take an NSAID, Motrin is the prime example. I took some a few weeks ago, and it was literally because I had trouble walking.
Yeah.
Um, you know, and you've seen some of my lifts, and for my age and body weight, my size and strength ratio is pretty good, I think.
Oh yeah.
Um,
That's for
you
sure.
know,
Yeah.
and as I don't carry a lot of body fat, so um, but I used to, hearing what Paul said, years ago after a squatting injury, my family practice doctor had prescribed very large doses of ibuprofen. And it wasn't until sometime later where I had undergone some routine lab work and found out my kidney function tests were elevated. And I had a renal ultrasound, which was fine. But, even my own doctor had said, "Oh, well, Jesus, who prescribed this?" I said, "You did." And he's like, "Oh, well, don't take that anymore."
No.
Um, and in the military, it's like one of our standard, military medical jokes is change your socks, drink some water, take some Motrin, and in no particular order. And that's usually the basics of a lot of things, because we mask pain.
Yeah.
And it becomes very, very dangerous, especially in austere environments when people are likely to be overworked and dehydrated and whatnot. But
Right. What
yeah.
kind of dosage for how long did
Well, we usually, 2,400 milligrams is the actual maximum daily dose, if it's prescribed. Um, I'd say probably 3,200 milligrams,
Wow.
is probably the average dose. And maybe mixed with other things like Mobic and, maybe Tylenol on top of that.
right?
So, it's unfortunate because even when we talk about like the realm of things like tactical athletes, those kind of things are not uncommon, because we need people to perform. And you
Yeah.
know pain is often not something that is acceptable, to sideline somebody,
Yeah.
like it is in the more so in the civilian world. So
Yeah.
yeah.
Well, Paul, what do you suggest to people though that need like someone use me as an example that needs a little bit of relief to get sleep and just that
Well,
rest or Mark or Paul, whoever.
that's a tough question because it's often what would I do versus what would I tell you to do,
Right.
and I do this even with my veterans, like if it was me, I would probably load Motrin for a couple of days, like
Yeah.
800 milligrams, every 6 hours or so, and then do that for like 2 days, and then taper back down off of it, and then don't take anything, see if that helps.
Huh.
But it depends whether it's an acute injury or it's a chronic overuse condition.
Right.
You're in your mid-30s now. You have a career where you do physical work, and you're a silverback gorilla in the gym. So the beating that your joints take, it's understandable that you would have some degree of inflammatory process going
Yeah.
on, and then there's all those other things that we recommend to people, things like fish oil and glucosamine or chondroitin, or, some of these other things that are said to help, with
Yeah.
joint pain and muscle pain and inflammation. I'll be honest, I've read some studies that say they work, and I've heard anecdotal evidence, but I wouldn't put any stock in it. Nothing beats NSAIDs, and and if you're looking to just take care of yourself without medicine, nothing beats days off. And
Right.
I think I heard Paul say the only thing that corrects that is not lifting, and that's true, and that's often what we don't want to hear, because we think that frankly, I'm one of those people that doesn't even really believe so much in the deload, so much as if you really need the time off, just take the time off.
Yeah. I usually program twice a year. I'll take a full week off. You want to hear a crazy stat? 1 in 7 acute kidney failure cases are related to NSAIDs.
Yeah.
Really?
Yeah, it's crazy. You want to and Tylenol, you look at that one up sometime. Acetaminophen is most acute liver failure cases. Like, I think it is the majority of acute liver failure cases are related to acetaminophen.
Yeah.
So I've had people who I've taken care of, service members who have overdosed on acetaminophen, who required ICU level of care, in order to get off of it. And one of the things I think that's really prominent with that, Paul, is if we did cutaway sections and we looked at demographics, and I would imagine that 1 in 7 of kidney failure, if the numbers upticked higher for like later middle-aged Black men, who have other, comorbid conditions, whether it's high blood pressure or pre-existing like stage 1 or 2 chronic kidney disease or diabetes, those would be the people that I would imagine that would tip them right over the edge.
Yeah.
Here, this is from the NIH directly. 50% of all reported cases of liver failure are related to acetaminophen use, and 20% of transplant cases.
Yeah.
Wow.
It's worse than alcohol.
Yeah.
Wow.
Yeah.
That's amazing.
Well, it's something you can buy over the counter.
Yeah.
And that's the problem, so you say, you use the, acronyms of NSAIDs, people don't even fully really understand that or get the whole, what that really means, that those are the medications that are actually anti-inflammatory. Acetaminophen is not anti-inflammatory at all. And, so people, they don't even know that, look at additive effects. My evil stepfather started to bleed out once, and he was anticoagulated with Coumadin because of an aortic valve replacement. And his doctor had prescribed him naproxen for his arthritis pain. And he was taking over-the-counter Advil on top of that. And he was taking like a generic form of ibuprofen, like some sort of ibuprofen PM. So he had this massive additive effect of all those drugs, and he developed a gastric ulcer, and he almost bled to death. Wow. So,
you hear that all the time. Aspirin will do it too.
Right.
A lot of people. Yeah, there's people that die from ulcers.
Mm-hmm.
Exactly.
Yeah. I've had a bleeding ulcer before. They're no fun. I had it from I had Lyme disease really bad, and I was on antibiotics off and on for almost 2 years straight. Mm-hmm. And then I ended up with a bunch of ulcers in my stomach. And one of them, I remember I went out with some friends. I don't drink very often. I had a few beers, and I mean, I'm talking about like I drink like once or twice a year, mm-hmm. and I was throwing up blood afterwards. I'm like, this is not good.
Really? Wow. I had a buddy in high school. He was a buddy on my football team, but he was a good friend of mine, and actually was he's a recovering addict himself. But when he was in school, he was an addict to the point where he was addicted to anything. It didn't matter. Like if we're going to go get pizza, he's going to have 3 pizzas and stuff himself full. Like it's just kind of his mentality. But with same thing with drinking and kind of eating, he developed ulcers at such a young age because he would always overeat and throw up and just continue this cycle over and over. But he'll never be the same because he did so much damage to there. It's just, not repairable from what I understand. But one thing he used to drink was literally aloe vera, literally just cut
I've
aloe
never heard
vera.
of anybody doing that before.
Yeah, I know, but it seemed to work for him because he'd try everything else, any over the counter thing, and he would literally get the aloe vera leaves and he'd mix it in water and get some of the juice out and just continue to sip on that. It was soothing to him. Wow.
Oh, that's interesting. Yeah.
Yeah.
I mean, yeah, it looks like you can. I've never heard of that before. You can drink it.
Yeah, I've seen a product before that does it for, I don't know what the product was advertised for, something digestion wise or something for like better digestion. And aloe vera was an active ingredient.
That was a big thing in the 80s. They used to sell that at the leftover hippies that were, opening all the nutrition shops in the early 80s.
Really?
They used to sell aloe vera juice.
Says
I've never had
too much of it.
But,
Too much of it can cause cramping and diarrhea.
No,
you might poop your pants.
Yeah, too many things that can trigger that in our life right now.
Well, I don't want to sound like I'm saying that you shouldn't take ibuprofen or acetaminophen. It's a tool, that you keep in your toolbox, but you will only pull it out when you absolutely need it. So, like, I think sometimes too many people use stuff like that as a crutch, versus actually fixing the problem that's going on. So, but if you get into a situation where you have true inflammation or a situation where you have arthritis, you may not have a choice. I have arthritis in my hands. I don't have severe arthritis, but my knuckles swell up and stuff like that. So it happens. But there are times where you use it, but you just limit the use, the duration. Once again, it's back to the whole dose duration of the drug that causes the toxicity.
Right. Yeah, and if you're not fixing the underlying problem by taking time off and you're just using ibuprofen to push through today and push through tomorrow, then that's not why. So I'm starting
honestly, you know what one of the best anti-inflammatories is?
What?
Ice.
Yeah. Dude, Jackie ices it all night long, whatever it is. If it's her shoulder, not all night long, but if something's bothering her, she's got ice, constantly swears by it.
That's when, often we hear people talk about, lower back pain and tenderness and like gluteal pain or sciatical pain. And, aside from using anti-inflammatory, if you're not going to use opiates, and you're not going to use anti-inflammatories, the best thing I've ever seen for sciatic pain is keeping the body within alignment and icing. So, I've had patients even in the field having people just lay down and ice the areas along the sciatic nerve,
right,
to take that pain and inflammation down. Yeah,
I've used it for back pumps and it's helped a few times, just laying down and getting the back pumps to go away within half hour.
That's one of the interesting things with TB500. I don't know if you've ever used any of the healing peptides, but it's an anti-inflammatory and it doesn't have the toxicity like ibuprofen or acetaminophen. Well, acetaminophen's not an anti-inflammatory, but it's doesn't carry the same toxicity. I don't know. I've used it. I don't know if it makes much of a difference, but a lot of people use the healing peptides such as TB500 or BPC 157.
I mean, I've used them. They've worked for me, but it depends on the area. If I can't get the drug to the area, it's not, I've tried the oral BBC and that does nothing but just kind of soothe my stomach issues, but I don't really believe in the oral bioavailable BBC.
Well, the BPC, if memory serves me correctly, people are going to slaughter me if I'm off on this one, but if I recall correctly, it was actually an enzyme produced in the gastric juices that how your stomach and your mouth heal faster than any other part of your body. It promotes healing, rapid healing. So for soft tissue injuries where you actually have hurt something, it's going to help with that. But like if you have inflammation in a tendon or something of that, like if your tendons, joints, or whatnot are inflamed, it's not going to do anything.
Yeah, I feel you.
So like if you actually have a soft tissue injury, such as a muscle tear or something like that, that will help speed up the recovery of that, but it's not going to do anything for inflammation.
That's the only spot I had success was in my shoulder, where I could actually get it really close, injected close to where I needed to be.
TB500, on the other hand, is an anti-inflammatory.
Right, so I was using both. So, BBC by itself didn't do much, but using both of them seemed to do the trick a lot better.
But they're probably, I don't know, I don't know if it's just a placebo, but it's probably a safer alternative, one that you don't hear talked about, than pounding NSAIDs all day long.
Right. Yeah, absolutely. All right, I'm going to share my screen. I wanted to, like I was saying to you guys, I kind of wanted to show some of Mark's whiteboard, some of these lessons he puts together for some of the
I hope there's no spelling errors in those.
It's all right. We'll bust your chops about it. But first things first, Mark, how the hell do you stay so fucking lean? Look at this shit. This is Mark 24/7, just like, and this isn't doing justice here. I mean, what's a diet look like for Mark?
Thank you. I don't, I've told you, I don't, and I was trying to tell Pete next to me there, I don't, I've been doing this a long time, and I haven't, I've told you, I haven't used drugs, PEDs, I guess we're calling them now. Back in the old days, they were just, we're still doing drugs, in years and years and years. And so, I'll claim that everything I have is natural.
Mhm.
And, I just, I try to stay away from processed foods. It's honestly, it's really, people don't believe me when I say that. And often I get, accused of using some PEDs. But, fuck, if I was using PEDs, I'd weigh 40 pounds heavier.
Yeah.
But,
absolutely.
but yeah, I don't eat really any processed foods. I try to eat mostly just whole foods. I derive most of my carbohydrates from fruits and vegetables.
Mhm.
Occasionally oatmeal. Like tonight, I'm going to have my own homemade pancakes
Mhm.
that I made with, oats and protein powder and bananas, and that's it. That's all that's in it.
Nice.
Oh, and eggs.
Yeah.
Are you tracking your macros at all, or are you just intuitively eating?
It's just intuitive, Paul. I'm pretty certain I range probably about a gram of protein per pound of body weight, roughly. And I'll be honest, I have no idea where my carbohydrates are usually. And I base, I think I actually carb cycle, but I base it mostly intuitively,
Yeah.
So I don't plan out or stage my carb cycling, but I do it. I don't do a lot of cardiovascular work. I do walk. I occasionally hit the heavy bag for like 3-minute rounds. I don't sprint anymore because of my hips, and I don't do any marathons anymore because of my hips. So
Seems like
it's
Go
pretty
ahead.
hard to get fat eating whole foods.
Right. I think, I say that to be transparent, that my wife and I probably have pizza like once a month.
Yeah, I mean, that's
And
insignificant in the grand scheme of things.
Yeah.
exactly. And it's, I do have to be careful around peanut butter because I am an addict when it comes to peanut butter. So I'm careful. And yeah, that's it. And you know what? I usually train 6 days a week. So and I do a modified push-pull leg split, and
Exactly what I do.
I keep moving. It's hard work and good nutrition.
Yeah.
If you look at sorry, Dave.
I was just going to say, a lot of the stuff I see that you put for recipes, Mark, you seem like you're pretty low in fat in general. Like, I don't see you add a ton of fats to anything, or, if anything, it's good, like, little peanut butter or whatnot.
Yeah. Occasionally, avocados, olive oil, what is it? Cultured butter, ghee.
Ghee.
You've seen that? Yeah.
Yeah.
Occasionally coconut oil. That stuff's fucking awesome.
Yeah. I've never used ghee, but I see Chris Bumstead uses a lot of that and really is into it. But
it's delicious.
any good? Is it good?
Oh, it's delicious. Yeah. Yeah. Tread lightly, friend. Tread lightly.
Yeah, you will your butthole will explode if you do too much of it.
Right. Right.
I mean, you look around the world though, like at the societies that eat mostly whole foods, you don't see fat people. So like you think about Mediterranean foods, like people in the Mediterranean that mostly eat meats and whole foods, they aren't
Right.
fat. Or
Yeah.
Japan would be an example of
Right.
the diet's predominantly made of fish and rice. You
Right.
don't see many
Right.
fat Japanese people.
Yeah.
Well, it seems
Actually,
like when,
if you had scrolled back that picture of me holding my oldest daughter as an infant, I think that was the last time I was coming off of any
I saw that. You look pretty
any
You
young.
look
enhancing
thicker there.
agents.
Yeah.
Back I used to back
It
in the
was the
days I
metrics,
used
right?
to write some commentary for Men's Health magazine and did some comment work with Dr. Scott Conley back then. So yeah,
That's awesome.
that little child, by the way, is now in Army basic training and texted me today that she got the highest score in her basic training battery for the Army combat fitness test.
That's
So
awesome.
Really? Wow.
yeah, yep.
This is
So
your daughter I know.
that's my daughter right there. Yeah.
Gotcha. Yeah, I wanted to talk on this one because I will admit I don't know jack squat about sleep apnea. I mean, I get the general premise, but I don't understand um, other than choking yourself in the middle of the night, how this is really, how has it affected me? Like, all I know is I snore like a banshee one night, the next night I won't. And it's totally hit or miss. But I'm starting to get to the point where it's like, I value my sleep and I don't want to have issues down the road. I see people like, Derek from More Plates, More Dates talk about that sleep apnea is one of the silent killers that no one really kind of addresses, especially with the bodybuilding world because of our body weight being so high, the thicker necks. But you put this together, Mark, and go ahead, Paul.
I couldn't get my blood pressure down, even with medication. But it was the sleep apnea. As soon as I got a CPAP machine, started using the CPAP machine, my blood pressure came right back down.
Yeah.
But you put this together, Mark. I figured you can maybe give us
crazy.
the 2 cent tour of this, kind of related to how you're telling it to the veterans as well.
Yep, absolutely. So this was my part 2. I don't remember what part 1 was. So the board reads from, your right-hand side to the left. Yeah. So it's sort of like done Arabically, I guess. So yeah, literally 1 out of 5 Americans, has problems that are stemmed from sleep apnea. And, unfortunately, I think there's a big issue about, the cause and effect, the chicken and the egg, so to speak. Because interestingly, you mentioned, like bodybuilders having heavier body weight and thicker necks. And often there are some physicians that will just go ahead and diagnose people as a risk factor to qualify for like sleep studies just by the circumference of their neck. And you know what? I would often balk at that, but I think in retrospect, it's probably a good idea. Because along with that, we do see a lot of hidden problems. So the majority of persons, I think typical Americans, and we're not, I think the 3 of us are not typical Americans in a lot of ways. And neither are the people in our community. But when we're talking about sleep apnea, you're talking about, roughly 61% people who, they suffer from being overweight. We see, a higher number of type 2 diabetes. And again, this comes from, is the diabetes because of the obesity? Is it secondarily, from the sleep apnea itself? I think those are actually of lesser concerns to me from a medical standpoint, because I think that the majority of the persons are already going to be overweight, or whether they have type 2 diabetes or they're going to be at risk for it. I mean, we look at it right now where, roughly 80% of Americans are now getting into that zone where they're, obese enough to start having secondary health conditions, where we've listed obesity and a lot of its causes, or its outcomes rather, in the top 7 causes of death as listed by the CDC. And the number 1 of that is always ischemic heart disease, and that's here in the United States, and that's everywhere else in the world. And that's one of the biggest things. So if we look at the other side of the board, we see that 77% of those persons have high blood pressure, much like Paul just said. His blood pressure was able to come under better control. If typically in the community, if your blood pressure isn't controlled by first, second, and third line agents, where we've loaded 3 different receptors and maybe a diuretic in there to manage your blood pressure, you've got some problems. You've likely have really bad obstructive sleep apnea, or you have something like renal artery stenosis, and that may have been caused by this sleep apnea as well. So when you don't breathe and you're not taking breaths, we see these exponential rises in your blood pressure, and when you're apneic, we see drops in your oxygen concentration and rise in your CO2 levels. So Here's where we see oxygen and carbon dioxide. We have good air and inflammatory air. When your blood pressure goes up, it increases all the pressure against your blood vessels, and it makes them stiffer and it makes them thicker. So it just goes to say that over time, this will exponentially increase your risk for high blood pressure, stroke, sudden death, kidney disease, and you'll probably end up again with diabetes as well. And I think I have in here the costs associated with this, just in medical costs alone. So after treating obstructive sleep apnea, about 200,000 persons, we were able to change medical costs.
Right. Untreated sleep apnea costs American an extra $4.3 billion per year.
Yeah.
Wow.
It's crazy, right?
Yeah. It feels like it's something so overlooked.
And the picture of sleep apnea, it really differs. So I have sleep apnea, and I didn't even know it. And so we see a phenomenon right now, particularly with combat veterans who come back from theaters of operation suddenly seem to have obstructive sleep apnea. It's even worse if you've had a traumatic brain injury, and it's even worse if you have PTSD and insomnia. So, and I'm one of those lucky fuckers who has all of those things. And I had a sleep study, and I have severe sleep apnea, and I function much better when I wear my CPAP machine. But I'll be honest with you, I have difficulty sleeping for a number of other reasons, and often wake up in the middle of the night and tear it off my face. Right. But here's where we see, here's where I think, and I would hypothesize, this is where the perfect storm is encountered. So when the body is under a certain amount of stress, right? We know the adrenal glands kick into effect, our pituitary gland, our hypothalamus are kicked on, our amygdala is working overtime, and we're dumping all these catecholamines, all these stress hormones into our blood system, and those things that cause our fight or flight responses, and those things that happen normally with it, like an increased heart rate, an increased blood pressure. We may get a dumping of glucose into the bloodstream to give muscles more energy, shunting of blood away from the gut and out into the periphery, rising our blood pressures. So, everything that I just mentioned is actually becomes one of these side effects of sleep apnea. Because we know that over time, if we keep dumping, blood sugar into the body, particularly under cases of stress, your liver and the muscles can only absorb so much before it gets dumped back out again, right? And gets converted into fatty acids and converted into fat. And that's where we see, the beginnings of insulin resistance. We start seeing, people with either fibrotic or at the very least fatty livers. This is when we see, increases in like that central adiposity, the belly body fat that we see, particularly in men over the age of 30, and it's really centralized, and they often, have thinner extremities that seem to go with it. That dreaded dad bod. I think we like to poke fun at those dudes, but I think it's because, unfortunately, these guys are probably all stressed out. They're not sleeping. Their bodies are pumped full of cortisol and estrogen. Because of this stress hormone cascade, it's wreaking havoc on their own testosterone levels.
Wow.
And and everything that's on that board that talks about our major body systems, we could superimpose that board onto a bunch of other of my boards. So whether it was it was insulin resistance and increased body fat, whether it was the board on declining testosterone levels, whether it's the board on I don't know, coronary artery disease, or these all metabolic syndrome. Back in the 90s, we had we didn't know what to call it back then. We called it Syndrome X, and then we called it metabolic syndrome, and now we just call everything what it is. High blood pressure, hyperlipidemia, altered glycemic control, and body weight is the diseases that kill so many Americans, particularly men. There's all these other authors that are out there, and they talk about, just something simple as inflammatory processes that are responsible for this. And, one of the chief ones right now are stress hormones and glucose. And those are two major things that we fail to even get under control. And I'll be transparent and use myself as an example. So, what is one of the reasons why I can maintain a high amount of muscle and a very low body weight? Because I'm one of those freaks who has an abnormally high level of regular testosterone. And I found out recently that, fortunately, my prior, PED use had no lasting effect on my own endogenous levels. But I found out that my levels took a dump during a high period of stress. And I got put on Humira, which is an immunologic agent to treat my inflammatory arthritis. And the VA's endocrinologist refused to see me because he said that I didn't need any TRT or hormone replacement, and that I was probably just another one of these veterans that was out there trying to get testosterone to ride the T train for life, which I'd be more than happy to do. But at the same time, we needed some answers because of everything I just explained to you. And his response to my doctor was, all these other things need to be ruled out first, which is everything I just mentioned. Right. And I wrote back to my doctor and I said, you've already ruled this out, all these things out, and the things that I have, you're already treating. So explain to me what the problem is.
Sounds like quite a snowball effect with all those things. I mean,
exactly.
Poor sleep's going to eat the poor glucose.
I just finished my first 4 doses of this new medication, and my hormone levels all came back up into what I'll consider to be a reasonable level. But yeah, it's, you know, it for regular Americans to, I think, to have a, you know, a big working understanding of these health conditions is enormous, because we could, you know, not only improve a lot of people's lives, make people healthier, but we would prevent an enormous amount of deaths. And oh no, did I kick myself off? No, there I am.
Nope, you're still
You know, and you know, my veterans who some are my age or older, you know, they often say to me, you know, this is the first time I've ever heard this before. Why
Yeah.
hasn't anybody ever told me this? I have all these problems. I didn't know any of these things. You know, and I feel that, you know, that's that's my primary job is to give my veterans the tools that they need in order to, you know, effectively negotiate the healthcare system, whether it's, you know, the mass health system, whether it's the VA healthcare system, or some other private system.
Yeah.
And, you know, and debunk a few myths along the way. So,
Yeah. Do you see that with a lot of your clients, Paul, that they kind of overlook sleep apnea,
Oh
possibly?
yeah, yeah, and doctors do too. It seems like a lot of times, you know, one of the when I have you know from working with me, but I have my guys get their blood panels done. I have people track their blood pressure at least a couple times a week, and then have people track their glucose levels so we can keep tabs on those things, and you know make sure there isn't some sort of metabolic disorder. And it's really bad in the bodybuilding community. I mean, it at the end of the day, you know, body mass is, you know, carrying more body mass, even if it is muscle, is not great for you.
Right.
So but I do work with quite a few veterans. I see a lot of guys come to me that are, their testosterone is essentially shut down. It's a weird thing. I don't know. I mean, Mark, you probably have seen it, but it's an odd thing. I've heard, you know, and your explanation of the stress cascade makes it make more sense, but it's odd to me, like how many vets come to me that have PTSD that have like no testosterone at all, essentially.
right. And that's exactly what we're seeing. So, you know, when during, you know, my last combat deployment, one of the things that I would explain to, you know, soldiers when we would talk about things like combat and operational stress is, you know, when you're in a theater of operation and your operation tempo is super high, and you know, you gotta also remember less than 1% of people deployed to combat are really engaged in, you know, day-to-day combat. But you know, like my job, you know, I'm a medical provider. So, you know, I'm dealing with everything from physical casualties to mental health casualties to people shooting themselves in the head to wanting to shoot other people. And, you know, in the setting of, you know, 18-hour work days and, you know, indirect mortar and missile attacks on a daily basis. And so when we think about it, you know, it does start to make sense because you know, these men and women are living in an environment where you have to be, you know, on your A game all the time. So your stress levels are through the roof. And, you know, I'm not convinced that we have really good we don't really have good modulators for this for some reason, you know. And I think there comes a time that, you know, like you see with veterans and we see it as well, right? So we're seeing almost like a comorbid condition where it's PTSD, it's low testosterone, and it's PTSD or and mild traumatic brain injury and low testosterone. and it makes sense because the body tries to compensate itself by, I think, by dumping in, you know, these levels of cortisol. And we've already seen that abnormal levels of cortisol and, you know, will start to drop testosterone levels. And that might be, you know, one explanation at the very least. And I think if we add in some of those other things that we know that affect hormone levels, you know, like crappy sleep, whether it's from
Yep.
sleep
Yeah.
apnea or it's, you know, it's nightmares and flashbacks. Um, you know, it's just by being revved up And I'm, one of the things that I found interesting not that long ago, and it was a study that was sponsored by the VA, and I want to say it might have been the National Institutes of Health, but that I'm not exactly sure. But the study was on combat veterans who have PTSD and who had comorbid coronary artery disease or ischemic heart disease, and that was primarily seen in men. So, again, we don't know what the exact cause was, or if it's a cause and effect, but there's definitely a comorbid sense. And we also saw it in women. Now, we saw it in women who weren't necessarily combat veterans, but we saw it in women who were victimized by military sexual trauma. So they too were living or suffering with PTSD, and subsequently also had coronary artery disease, that were almost all of them were anecdotal findings on cardiac catheterizations. So, is there a link between the two or the three? I'd say yes, there is. Can I prove it? No, I'm not smart enough, but I'm sure there's got to be a scholar out there who's writing papers on this. So
yeah. Yeah, it's wild stuff. Go ahead, Paul.
I would say it's interesting. So it's, at the end of the day, it's multifactorial.
Mm-hmm. So it sounds like,
yeah.
The other fun one I'm going to pull up, we talked about the other day on your podcast, Paul. Let's see, I got to find it. It was
not colorectal cancer.
No, good old marijuana. I know you had done one, Mark, with
yes,
marijuana and cannabinoids.
There is one somewhere in there.
I think it's kind of quite a bit down here. I'll find it. But I heard the other day, must have gone past it. I heard Andrew Huberman actually kind of go against saying THC and CBD is not good for bodybuilders, in the sense that it doesn't allow us to get into the rapid eye movement part of our sleep. Kind of so over time, smoking or using CBD or THC over time is going to make a difference in your sleep quality, which would hinder your results as a bodybuilder. I don't know if you guys saw that. Or
yeah, I did see that.
Where the hell is it?
The sleep apnea thing, though, is fascinating. Like almost everybody in the bodybuilding community has sleep apnea. It's crazy.
I don't know.
I send guys in all the time to get sleep studies done, and
there it is. Yeah.
Well, you had a bitch of a time getting your sleep mask. I wonder how.
Yeah, it's such a pain in the ass process to go through to get one.
Do you know of like a third party place though that you can? You said you knew of a place that they send you the system.
Yeah, I ended up going through this place called Second Wind CPAP, and what they do is they send you a home sleep study. They have a doctor that'll write you a prescription they'll write you an order for a home sleep study. They send you the machine, you run it, send it back in, you mail it back in, and you have a consult with the doctor, and then they if you need one, then they'll send you a machine.
Is that like an out-of-pocket expense, or your insurance be able to help you on that? Or
my insurance covered some of it, but
yeah. But I was gonna say, the one thing that just came right to my mind about marijuana with veterans, though, is every once in a while when I use THC, it's not all the time, but I get pretty paranoid if I'm in the wrong setting, or it just happens. I don't know if you guys have ever experienced the same, but I'll definitely get a little angst or just paranoid, or kind of like, I hope no one calls my phone right now because I'm super baked, man. So I'd imagine that can't be helpful to veterans. I'll
tell you. When I did this block of instruction, there were a couple of other reasons for it. One, at the time, we have I don't even give the name of my shelter, but the shelter is a dry shelter, so we have a ton of guys who are in certain stages of recovery, and we do get some grant funding through the Veterans Administration. So it is a federal agency. And if you're getting any funding from a federal agency, pot's still a no-no. So even though it might be legal here in the Commonwealth, it's not legal in our shelter. And we weren't making a real big deal out of it, but actually, let me rephrase that. They weren't making a real big deal out of it, and then I came along, and it got into this discussion of men who are in recovery, who really need to be in recovery. And although we're not a detox or a crisis stabilization program or even a residential treatment program by any means, but we do have men in recovery, and it's not just my opinion, but it's the opinion of the Veterans Administration that any substances are going to get in the way of that recovery process.
Right.
Whether it's the occasional drink or it's the occasional marijuana use. So that was one of the main reasons I brought it up. The other reason I brought it up was because in the veteran community, there's a huge push for it. So right now, we have over 3 million global war on terror veterans right now in the United States. I'm one of the older ones. So, we have the cohort is really probably mostly in their 20s and early 30s still. Because don't forget, most of our young combat veterans and soldiers are between the ages of 17 and 23. It's not like in the movies where it's grizzled 40-year-old sergeants kicking down doors. When I first joined the Army, I was 17 years old. Here I am at 55 these many years later. My daughter just is going to be 22 tomorrow, and she's actually one of the older people in her basic training class. So there's a huge push right now in the veteran community to get the VA to be a little more accepting about the use of marijuana. And there's been a lot of discussion about prescribing medical marijuana for veterans. But you're right. So I'm in the group that I'll say that I don't believe that to be helpful, because I believe that in my clinical experience, that the majority of persons who use marijuana, THC, I don't know enough about CBD to talk about it, but that are using marijuana to manage mental health symptoms, I've never seen the outcomes be favorable in the long term.
Right.
So, whether it's paranoia, whether it is a worsening of depression symptoms, whether it is a worsening of anxiety, or
a gateway back to their original drug.
It can be, and often I think there's a refractory set of symptoms as well. It's kind of like, if it's like when we tell people that having a glass of wine or a bottle of beer before bed may make you sleepy and you may fall asleep more quickly. But as soon as that, 4 hours later, when that alcohol level drops, you're going to wake right up, and your sleep is going to be disrupted. So, in the long run, that it didn't help. From what I've seen in the context of veterans who are living with PTSD and comorbid anxiety and depression and substance use disorders, I don't see marijuana being helpful at all. And I know that there are going to be a number of veterans and clinicians who would argue with me, and that's okay. I can kind of roll with that. And which is why I say in my own experience,
right.
Which by the way is lengthy and vast, and has been all over the world. So so that being said, I think I've got enough credibility to say that I don't think it's a great idea.
No.
But, I know that there's a ton of people out there who say my life is so much better now that, I use CBD or I use THC oils or I smoke pot. And I know a ton of people that do, and that's fine. According to all my government paperwork, it says the last time I used marijuana was in 1984, and I stand by that.
Yeah. Well, I know from my side of the coin, I can't say from veteran perspective, but I can say from an addict perspective, I'm kind of honestly a rare scenario where I can use marijuana as an alcoholic and not really associate the two as like a gateway for me, or it doesn't pull me back towards alcohol. I've been lucky to be able to separate the two. Now, if I was to have a night of cocaine or something, or doing something wild with different drugs, then my values would go out the window and I'd be drinking in 2 seconds. But I'm able to use it for a little bit of just kind of relaxation and really sleep. It's usually the last hour. We'll take an edible or roll a bone up and go to bed. But I can say I do have a few friends. I have one specific that Mark, that is a combat veteran, has TBI and PTSD. And for him, I swear, if you took away his vape pen, it would just be a nightmare for him to go throughout his day. It's just that it takes, like you say, the anxiety down. Like we went to a Patriots game. He came down and visited from his home, and we went to a Patriots game. And you got to imagine, with all those people so tight and close, it's the first time since the 90s that he's ever done anything like that. It was, they shoot off the fireworks at the Patriots. The muskets get shot off by the Patriots down there. So if he wasn't able to medicate a little bit ahead of time and then have us guide him along saying, hey, we just scored, they're going to fire the guns, and get him prepared. I mean, it would have been the THC would have, if he didn't have that would have definitely been detrimental. So I guess it can be a case-to-case basis, but like you say, that the majority, I could imagine that's not going to be helpful.
Yeah. And I 100% wholeheartedly agree with that, Dave, that I think it has to be a case-to-case thing, because there's much like in bodybuilding, we talk about intuitive training and bro science, which the real scientists will say that's nonsense, but then we'll say no, it isn't, because the bros know. Well, people, the veterans know too. So if I could be having this entirely different conversation and say, well, I smoke 1 joint a day and I have, this edible, and my symptoms are perfectly managed, and I function perfectly fine. And it's not a gateway drug, and it hasn't increased paranoia, and it hasn't done this and that. And if somebody was to tell me that, I would 100% believe them, until I saw something contrary to that. So
I think anytime that you're using a psychoactive drug to treat a mental illness, it's a slippery slope.
Yeah, no, that makes perfect sense, because that person needs to be stable in the fact of being sober. They need to be able,
I don't know if, my story. My ex-wife is an addict, and her path to addiction was self-medicating for mental illness, really. And she's been sober for 5 years now. I'm proud of her for staying sober, but that was the slippery slope. She had severe anxiety and depression and self-medicated, and then you become dependent on those compounds. I would think that's where the slippery slope is, but there's varying degrees of evil though too. I mean, you from being an alcoholic that alcohol seems to be, I don't know, way more detrimental, at least in my experience, than THC is. Not justifying THC as a pathway to treat yourself. You really should be working with a mental health professional and addressing the underlying issues that exist. But
subconsciously, I might be just not realizing that little bit of THC and CBD gummies are just giving me the little bit of buffer between my cravings to alcohol. I mean, I'm just kind of hypothesizing, but sometimes that's all I need is just being redirected, because it's tough being an addict sometimes. I mean, I might have a week where I don't think about alcohol at all. I might have a day where it's like I'm trying to avoid driving by a liquor store because it's just on my mind, and then you're thinking about it, and then you're like, what's, you start talking to yourself and convincing yourself of things that aren't true. Kind of like what Paul says. I was the same way. I was kind of medicating my stress, and I knew what I was doing. So I would suggest to anyone, when you catch yourself and you're being honest with yourself, like, hey, I'm using this drug of choice to make myself mask a problem that needs addressing, and you're self-medicating that way. That's your first step, where you should step back, look at the big picture of things, and see if you can make a change, or talk to someone that you really trust. If I didn't have support too, like, that's why I admire what you do, Mark, with the veterans. Like, if they didn't have at least someone to speak with or reason with on some topics and keep them occupied during some times where they're having difficulties, doing these things on your own are impossible.
Yeah.
If I didn't have my wife, it would be impossible, on some times of life,
It's I would agree with that 100%. It's there's been, I don't know if you had the opportunity to read a couple of my wife's articles that she's written, in the Havoc Journal, that sort of, it's the Havoc Journal. It's an online veteran journal. She's written a few of their articles. She's a writer, guest writer for them, where she's talked about what it's like living, with a husband who's a combat veteran. And, the majority of my time has either been spent in the military or in federal law enforcement. And, we've, it's been things that have contributed to a lot of stress in our family. And, I think if I didn't have the support and encouragement from Wendy, I wouldn't be here. I wouldn't be here having this conversation. I don't know where I would be. But Wendy and I met in a gym, essentially, and this has been part of our lifestyle, for the last 22 years, and. But we see, I think, in the veteran community, you say, having access and understanding, whether it's mental illness or it's medical illness. I think really negotiating the systems is one of the biggest problems. We often hear, veterans struggling to navigate, through the VA medical system, and it can be a nightmare for some people. I'm fortunate in the idea that I'm a healthcare provider and I'm not 22 years old, so I can navigate the system. I know the questions to ask, even when I haven't wanted to ask, and even when I haven't had the insight to seek services, and I had to have them sort of forced upon me. But at least I have that understanding. Now, I can only imagine what it would be like for a 22-year-old who, just came back from, a combat theater. And, I think one of the worst things, it's different, for active duty components versus National Guardsmen and reservists. When you're on active duty, you come home, and you demob with your unit, the same guys that you went overseas with, and you're still stationed with them, and you still work with them, and you reintegrate with them. I worked with a lot of guys who went to war. They were working in a federal prison, for God's sakes, and then they went to war, and then they came back and worked in a federal prison, and then went to war again. And then came back and worked in a federal prison, and and we wonder why they're stressed out all the time.
Yeah.
I think that would stress anybody out.
Exactly. So if I'm in that group that has lived in that lifestyle, and and it's very difficult. And I know plenty of guys who I've either served with or I've worked with who would come and see me offline because they didn't want to go see their own provider, or they didn't want to go see the EAP person at work.
Mm.
Particularly if they're still serving, because they don't want black marks, so to speak, in their medical records, things that they believe will be held against them because historically, seeking mental health services or seeking treatment for addiction has always seemed to have had negative consequences for service members in the past. And here's this paradox. We say to them, it takes a real man to man up and get health care and speak up for yourself, and see the mental health provider. And and then next thing you're Jimmy Super Soldier, and then next thing you're on quarters and you're taking medication, and everybody's like, yeah, look, that guy's a shitbag, and believe me, that's exactly how it goes down, and nobody wants that. So, while we can say to soldiers or to veterans, hey, get services, hey, call 988, press 1 for the Veterans Crisis Line, they're not going to do it. I mean, I just had this conversation, although I will say that since 988 press 1 has come out since July, the calls to that number have gone up exponentially.
Really?
They've gone through the roof. I think making it easier than dialing a 1-800 number has made that better, and so I can say that that's good.
Well, at least you got one resource that seems to be working correctly, because I see a lot of veterans that navigating the healthcare system's tough.
And it's not like the services aren't there. Like right now in this region, we have the Vet Center, which is a counseling service for combat veterans and their families, free of charge. It's a division of the Veterans Administration, but the medical record is kept separately. So it, whatever happens there essentially stays there. We do have a number of veterans clinics here in the Commonwealth, as well as a number of major medical hospitals for veterans. But the problem is that we're short on providers. There's long wait times for a lot of things, and frankly, veterans, particularly combat veterans, aren't great at waiting and aren't great at being told what to do. And when they get mixed messages, or they feel like they're being disrespected, it's often something that gets quickly ignites the fuse that sets them off. And unfortunately, this matches that picture of the out of control global war on terror veteran who is mental and bought a gun, and he's yelling and screaming at everyone, and somebody made a movie about it, and and that's what it is. When truly this is really those, although those things do happen, those those are outliers. I think the majority of I said earlier that there's 3 million global war on terror veterans right now in the United States. There are 3 million of us who are combat veterans who are currently, walking around among you. A lot of these people, myself included, are active in the veteran community. They're becoming politically active and trying to have a good voice. So, maybe some things will change. Maybe they won't. I don't know.
Yeah. Well, it's kind of like our last talks, don't be shy to ask your friends if what's going on, you see something up, lending some support goes a long way, whether it's an addict or a veteran that's having troubles or, just being a good friend in general. But
That's the biggest thing. We talked about that, particularly about suicide.
yeah,
Asking somebody if they're suicidal is not going to make them suicidal. That's just not true.
right.
They may lie to you, but you know, but
Yeah, don't be shy
yeah,
to
don't
act
be
directly.
shy.
Yeah,
If they're your friend, reach out. You're not going to make things worse by asking questions.
yeah. Yeah, it's really interesting. That's why I wanted to have you on, man. You you really do. I admire the way that you just put a lot of time and effort into those resources for the veterans. It's seems like really rare to see nowadays because a lot of my friends, they always say it's like trying to figure out what I'm allowed to do at the VA, how to go about things. It's just such a hassle where they give up easily,
Right.
I get a lot of guys reaching out to me that they're exasperated and frustrated with the VA.
Hmm.
They
Yeah.
said, I can't get help.
I hear that all the time. Just all my friends. It's constant,
Yeah.
and silly things like a friend of mine just trying to not get in trouble with the VA by using, trying to get like a medical marijuana card, right? It's like I understand federally it's illegal, but that was the one. He's a great example of a person who might need that, instead of SSRIs and all this and that. But
Right.
The guys that reach out to
yeah,
me are usually dudes that are in need of TRT or things like that. They talk to me and say that they can't get any help through the VA.
yeah,
Well, that's, and I would guarantee, Paul, they're 100% telling the truth because, the VA, like any other medical system or managed care system, has a clinical practice guideline for TRT. And they have a parameter for what is a normal total testosterone for the
Yep.
VA. I want to say, don't quote me, but it's like 302 to
Yep.
898 or something like that. And if you're, between, the ages of 20 and 60, as long as you're somewhere in there,
Yep.
they're like, no, you're good. Which frankly is not in alignment with the National Association of Urological something or other, the Urology Association, who will come and say that if your levels are near 300 and you're symptomatic, then the physician has a duty to treat you.
Yeah.
And that's unfortunately not in alignment with the VA. I just told you, moments ago what the VA endocrinologist said to my own doctor. They said, well, there's nothing wrong with this guy. Well, I saw a telehealth provider who said to me that I believe that you have some sort of your level dropped because of an inflammatory process secondary to your stress and inflammatory arthritis. And it was a combination of my mental health and my physical health that caused my level to drop. And I
It's
said,
not,
right.
yeah, it's not just the VA. I get guys reach out to me all the time. They said that their doctor tells them that a 300 testosterone level is normal. And I'm like, if you
Right.
feel bad, it's not normal.
It's
yeah,
not normal. Right, absolutely. And that's why I think a lot of the telehealth clinics, are becoming much more popular.
Yeah.
But
As long as that stands, it seems like they're trying to crack down on that now.
well, they are
Control
trying
it.
to crack down on it because, a lot of the payments, whether it was private pay or whether it was insurance, there had to be, like particularly before COVID, you had to physically go and see the provider.
Yeah.
Donald Trump and COVID got that to change because people couldn't go see the provider. So
Yep.
telehealth and phone calls became okay. Well, now people are starting to say that it's not okay. And if Mac wants to see, the endocrinologist practicing down in South Beach, who's going to write me a script for TRT and growth hormone and for peptides, they're going to say, no, you can't have that.
right.
Even if I was symptomatic and needed treatment. So
Yeah, I mean, that's a whole other can of worms.
It is.
I
It's
know.
huge.
I've heard some people say it's not going to make much of a big difference. Dr. Todd doesn't seem to be too worried about it himself.
Yeah, well, there's been a lot of pushback on it. I've Rick Collins. I don't, if you're familiar with him, but he's kind of the go-to attorney in the bodybuilding community. But he thinks it's a whole lot of nothing.
Mhm.
That they're really the law. I think what it was is they were trying to crack down on these clinics that were telemed prescribing pain medications, and the TRT stuff just kind of fell under it. I don't even think they even really knew.
Yeah.
So it just kind of got lumped in there with it because it technically it is a scheduled substance.
Yeah.
Right.
So kind of like
So
a pill mill problem. They're trying to.
yeah, and so it seems like the deadline for that to get enacted came and went, and nothing happened. So maybe they're backing down. There are a lot of people that get TRT through clinics and stuff now online. Probably a lot of them are in the government. So
Yeah.
I don't know if that's really going to be a thing now or not. We'll see. But I don't know why you need to see a patient in person to write a prescription for testosterone. If you look at, I don't know, maybe there's a necessary need to do so.
Well, you want to take that little reflex thing and check your knees and get some extra money, and let me.
Well, the problem is, like, I do a ton of consult calls with regular physicians too that reach out to me asking me questions. Which is mind-boggling to me how little GPs know about testosterone therapy. It's my or they may be treating a bodybuilder that has health issues, that has abused PEDs, and they don't understand anything about it. But it's mind-boggling to me how little a general practitioner knows about this stuff.
Yeah, I hear that a lot too. My father's been trying to get TRT for a while, because he thinks that that's going to be beneficial to him at his age, and his general practitioner doesn't seem to know much about it, and she just doesn't want to talk about it and won't educate him on it.
Well, there's a stigma associated
thing.
with it. And they also don't want the FDA knocking on their door, asking why they're writing these scripts too. So there is that too.
Yeah. But nonetheless, I think we're going to wrap this up. I've bugged you guys for long enough, but I appreciate everyone coming on. And if anyone wants to check out Mark's IG page there, I'll make sure I put it in the description. But what is it? Mark.arena.12?
Yes.
All right. And Paul, I'll put his info down below, and appreciate you guys being on. This was a lot of fun.
Thank you.
Covered a lot of ground.
Thanks for having me, Dave.
All right.
Paul, it was great. It was great meeting you. I love watching your videos.
Oh, thank you.
Watching your sites. I really like your videos. I think they're really informative. They're done very, very intelligently. You're incredibly articulate, and I think your information is truly no nonsense, and it's pretty awesome.
Mm-hmm.
Thank you. I appreciate that.
Yeah, he's all right.
All right.
Well, you know what? It's trustworthy. Like there's a lot of information out there, and you just got to feel like you're trusting someone telling you the truth, because there's some people that are very convincing that are not telling me, it's bullshit. They're not telling the correct answers.
I certainly don't know everything. I learn something new every day. I definitely learned a couple things on this one.
Yeah. Well, that's the nice part, is that I feel if you don't know something, you're honest enough to say that, and that's huge for people.
And that's the thing with my whiteboards too, is a lot of it is me drawing a picture and I start writing things, and most of this just kind of pours out of my head. Imagine having to be my wife and listening to the things that pour out of my head. It's dreadful for her, I think, sometimes, but I do, because times change, I do check my references a lot. And often, if you look at some of my boards, they're usually the boards that I don't specialize in. There's usually websites, and sometimes I even cite the current research, or at least where I got the information from. Because I have had, some of my veterans, like literally say, "Well, what makes you a fucking expert?" I don't know, 30 years of clinical practice, it makes me a fucking expert. But I say I'm not an expert in anything, and you can go to this website and check it for yourself.
Right. Right. Gotcha. Jackie wanted to say hi to you guys.
I just want to say hi and bye. I heard you guys were wrapping it up, but
Hi, Jackie.
how you doing?
How are you?
Doing pretty good. Just chilling out on this Sunday.
Yeah.
How you doing, Paul?
Good.
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 All right. Thanks, everybody. I'll talk to you guys.
All right. Have a great
take care.
night.